Well, hey everyone, thanks for tuning in here. The goal of this video is to hopefully provide a window into the general scope of what a worship team does, which will hopefully begin to facilitate some understanding of how work is handled and moves through a worship team generally. Now, the metaphor of an iceberg is useful for that purpose because with a worship team, like a lot of other teams, there's much more work that takes place below the surface that no one can see than there are things that get executed above the surface that everyone can see. And so I will also preface and call back to this idea that churches are organisms rather than organizations. It's just always dynamic. It's never static. Churches are alive. They have a microbiome. They have systems that make up the whole that need tended to regularly. Things are just always shifting and changing, and deficiencies are springing up that need special nutrients or special diet, at least for a certain season. And so we would do well to consider ourselves, I believe, like shepherds or farmers, always watching and tending to the health of the flock rather than assuming a plan and succumbing to tunnel vision towards our own goals and targets. And remember that the farm belongs to Jesus, and it's our job to know the voice of our chief shepherd and then respond to his directions. I really believe that if we all do that well, even across teams, we'll always remain unified in our direction. There just simply is no vision or communication system or work management strategy, etc., that can match the power of the Holy Spirit in directing us towards a target. Even viewing our little worship team iceberg here, I consider it a living organism. Our team is dynamic and alive, and the health of all the people and components need to be nurtured and maintained. And sometimes it's surprising or even counterintuitive as to which things we should focus on below the surface in order to make the biggest impact on the parts of the iceberg that's above the water. So let's jump in and let's look at some things here above the surface, as hopefully some are fairly obvious. The first item we can all see above the surface is our weekend gatherings. Now, when we evaluate our gatherings, some components of these things are super objective and easy to measure. For instance, did we have a service or not? And did the worship leader show up or not? And however, lots of other components about the gathering are super subjective and hard to measure. For instance, was it good or not? And it's difficult to measure success for a lot of church creative teams because we're not selling a specific product. So we don't have many clear objective metrics to analyze. But here are some basic questions we could consider relating to a worship leader's performance. First, remember we do this 52 times a year. So let's start by being gracious. And here's some questions. Were you there? Did the worship leader show up? Were volunteers there? Did they all know what was going on? Are you all still friends? Are you even friends still with your technical director? Or does he hate you today? And then how did you feel it went? Was it good? And was Jesus at the center of it all? Now, I would like to point out that each of those questions are connected to heaps of interconnected work below the surface, and it would be next to impossible to untangle and explain it all, as there's often no time to even consider it or track it, because guess what? Sunday is coming again in 6 days. And we'll get to more of this later, but for now, let's look at a couple other things that are up here above the surface. Easter and Christmas. Now, in the midst of producing these 52 weekends a year, we also have a few special or emphasized weekends like Easter and Christmas. Now, these services have similar infrastructures as a typical weekend, but we dive a lot deeper into the details. We collaborate with other teams to create more original content and smooth out specific transitions, and we just generally push the limits of our capacity a bit harder during these months, all while overlapping with normal work from our regular weekend routines. And this is all stretched, like I said, over multiple months as we approach those weekends. And the last thing I want to look at above the surface are special events. Special events seem to come in waves, and each event is like its own weekend gathering in terms of like workload and infrastructure, but the amount of them might take you by surprise as they do come around quite frequently. And like I said, it takes roughly the same amount of planning and preparation as a normal weekend, but it can also vary a lot because of their lack of routine. And so here are a few examples. We have staff meetings and worship nights, youth nights and children's recordings and filming events and weddings and funerals. And yes, everyone will want music. I had one old pastor tell me once that we marry 'em and bury 'em. That's our business. We'll always be relevant. And so I guess I am thankful we'll always have a job. I thought that was funny. Now, this is a really good place to pause and breathe and just reflect for a moment. Really try to get behind the eyes of a worship leader before we jump below the surface. Things up here everyone can see and understand. The worship team shows up and executes. It's all tangible. I would suggest that it's very seldomly understood, though, because you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. And when we jump below the surface, it can get messy and sometimes confusing if you don't understand the language or have similar skill sets. We rely on intuition down there. And I once heard someone say that for every minute a preacher preaches, they should spend an hour studying. So if you're going to teach for 30 minutes, it should reflect 30 hours of study. And as a worship leader, I feel a little tense looking at all these things above the surface because I instinctively know what it takes below the surface to make all of that stuff happen. And it's a lot of work. It's fast-paced, it's messy, it's instinctive, it's always changing. You can't plan for it or explain it, let alone try to document it or track it. And the time crunch makes it even crazier because Sunday's always coming, along with all those last-minute pivots. And so, yeah, I feel a little tense, like I could use a shoulder rub. But hey, if you're someone who manages a worship leader, I mentioned earlier that a few good questions to consider are, hey, did you show up? Did the volunteers show up? Did everyone seem to know what was happening? Are you still speaking? Does the technical director hate you? Was it good? And was Jesus happy about it? Now, these questions all point to things below the surface that a worship leader is either succeeding or struggling to manage. Again, it can get messy down here, and these examples are not going to be comprehensive. They're just 3 categorical examples for illustrative purposes. So first, we have to start with the plan. So hey, what songs are we doing? What's the sermon about? Didn't we do that song last week? How are we building momentum with our song choices? Hey, who's leading this week? What key are we going to do that in? What key can they sing that in? Hey, what band do I have? Do I have a great keyboard player? Because I need them to play that song. And who's going to tell everyone about this? And, I better update PCO or else no one knows what's going on. And then we have to put all of those things on repeat. What makes these things complicated is that they're all interconnected. For example, you might choose song keys based on who is leading that weekend. But then if that person later declines to serve, you have to loop back through these things multiple times over and over. Also consider that our scope always includes multiple weeks. So currently, we have songs roughed out about 8 weeks. And while this coming weekend, is right in front of us, we'll also be spinning plates for those other 8 weeks and a fair amount of detail as we approach them. So after our songs are roughly planned out, we immediately start preparing. Songs need to be produced. This just means we have to choose how many times we're going to sing the verses and the choruses and in what order, and we have to record all like the individual instrument and vocal parts or edit them because that's what we upload to Planning Center in order for volunteers to be able to hear their instrument isolated and learn their part to come in ready to play it on Sunday morning, and that's loads of work. And then we always play along with the computer essentially on Sunday morning. The computer is playing instruments that we don't have humans to play, and so that's some work to get programmed and ready to go. And then we also are preparing people. We might have scheduled worship leaders already when we were planning because we needed to know who was going to be singing to plan the songs, but now we got to fill out the vocal team, and we got to make sure we have a full band there, and then we have to communicate those details and changes with the tech directors, and we got to stay in touch with the pastors because pastors like to know what's going on. And then personally, we have a lot of preparation to do. We have to learn our instrument parts and vocal parts and memorize the lyrics, and that was always the hardest thing for me to do, is memorize the lyrics. And in the midst of all that, you really have to be with Jesus. Again, that's not a Sunday school answer. That's just the truth. You have to be ready to lead people at rehearsals and the congregation at services, and you don't want to lead people to music, and you don't want to lead people to yourself. You want to lead people to Jesus, and so you have to spend time with them. And in all of these planning and preparation details, there are just so many nuances and so many interconnected pieces. Newton's third law is definitely in effect down here. One move is going to affect many other things. I can illustrate this, for example. Maybe songs 3 weeks from now are really difficult to play. But that's okay because I've scheduled a great keyboard player for that week. But they just declined. And so now I have to change song number 2 because no one else can play it. But that affects the key that song number 1 needs to be in order to have a good transition. So let's just put them both in A flat. But now I just realized my guitarist that week doesn't really understand how to play in flat keys. So what am I going to do? And so anyway, that's just an example. Like, worship leaders are constantly zooming in and out and making little tweaks and adjustments as they go. And every campus, every week is unique. I'll say that again. Every campus, every week is unique. The last category we'll consider is maintenance. Look, we use instruments and they need to be tuned and repaired, and that takes a lot of time and expertise. We have volunteers, and volunteers are people, and people can have feelings, and feelings can get messy. And yeah, people, ministry. I love Judd Wilhite's quote when he says, ministry's messy because people are messy. Get over it, get a mop, start helping people clean up. We get to walk alongside people and help them clean up a lot of things. And look, we each have personal maintenance to be doing. We need to be stretching ourselves, growing our skills musically and vocally and theologically. And typically, we'll start thinking about some of that stuff like on a Thursday when we kind of have everything wrapped up and have a little space in our schedule and think, oh man, I should do some vocal exercises. Or, oh man, I should pick up that book and study. But right about that time is when we also get the text that, oh, we're going to change a song for this weekend. And that leads me to my next point. Nuclear fission. Now, I can't explain in detail what nuclear fission is, but basically atoms split and start running into each other, and then chain reactions ensue, and wild amounts of energy is released. And it's what causes atomic bombs, but also what fuels nuclear power plants. And that's what it feels like down here sometimes. Things just get unpredictable, and we're constantly cycling between planning and preparing and maintenance, and planning and preparing and maintenance, and planning and preparing and maintenance. And really, it's more of an art than a science. We just have to rapidly and intuitively respond to the inputs that we receive. And when we're doing this, it can feel, when we're doing it well, it can feel like running a nuclear power plant. But when we're not, it can feel a little bit like diffusing an atomic bomb for sure. We're always just spinning the immediacy of this weekend alongside getting the details nailed down for the next 4 weekends. And Easter, that's 9 weeks out, and maybe I don't have a guitarist yet in 3 weeks from now. Oh, I can't forget that vocal audition is next Tuesday. Oh, that's the same day as all staff meeting that I need to learn that new song for. And hey, we just changed a song for this week. Oh man. And so hopefully you can begin to see that this work is anything but linear. And thus far we've mostly just considered one location. But we currently have 4 little nuclear power plants, and the same work is taking place at each of them. Also, we've mostly just considered the worship team, but we're not down here alone. Broadcast, production, film, Marcom, look, we're all down here. And so, how do we even begin to take all of this work, which is highly individualized, yet somehow also highly collaborative, and bring it to the surface effectively? What even makes that possible? And believe it or not, the answer is fairly simple. People. Not just any people, but the right people. They have to be in love with Jesus. And no, that's not a Sunday school answer. They need to be humble, hungry, and healthy. Now, I might argue that health is something we could work on along the way, but as long as the other two are present. And they're talented, like the crazy talented. They bring things to the table that are just unreal, and they're so intuitive. They have to succeed at making instinctive decisions all the time. Think about it. Why does a graphic artist present a portfolio before an interview? Because we're trying to get a read on their instincts. Will they fit here or not? So much creative work is just a series of spur-of-the-moment, intuitive, and mostly subjective decisions. And this brings me back to the first non-negotiable here. They have to know Jesus deeply. Because if we're going to trust their instinctive decisions, then their instincts need to be informed by the character and nature and spirit of God. That's not a Sunday school answer. It is simply a non-negotiable. Now, intuition is admittedly hard to quantify. It's a little bit difficult to spot in an interview process. But ironically, you kind of begin to know it when you see it. You know, as I've thought about this, one of the best ways to measure someone's intuition might be to give them total freedom and just see what comes of it. Now, it's a crucial thing that we bring the right people onto the team, but it's equally crucial that we then trust them. We can't micromanage. Honestly, when you take the right people and place them in a relational environment that is built on trust, that's where the magic starts to happen. Now, I have a personal illustration of this from years ago. It was early in my career. I was a young worship leader. I was honored and flattered that CIY asked me to lead for summer conferences. And the only catch was it meant that I would need to be out of the office for 8 to 10 weeks in the summer, while hopefully still getting paid by the church because I wasn't making enough money traveling to, cover my paycheck. And so I was going to go ask my pastor. And what did my pastor say when I asked? His response was this: Greg, I don't care what you do through the week, but Sunday better be running on all cylinders when it comes around. Trust. He granted me trust. But that's not all, you see, because on the surface, it may have seemed unfair to other staff members or counterintuitive to traditional managers, but this was going to be really good for the church, too. You see, I was leading 2 worship sets a day for 10 weeks in a row. That's like 140 services in 2.5 months. It would take me 3 years to gain that much experience at a church Sunday to Sunday. And I was growing, I was learning, and the church was going to benefit too. He trusted that if I made the decision, I would work hard to bring quality results. And then he empowered me to do it. He gave me freedom and left me alone to make it all happen. And so I did. And guess what? Sunday mornings, they actually got better during those summer tours, not worse. Some other current examples of this type of trust and freedom might be, Myron going and traveling to record with Mav City. Now, I imagine he probably took some vacation time and probably paid for his own plane ticket and all that to make that happen. But look, man, if Mav City is calling Myron to go and record, hey, I think the church should get behind him and send him. Julia attending songwriting retreats. When our team spends time songwriting together, it might not seem at first glance on the surface like it's a great use of our time. However, it's had a major impact on how we analyze song lyrics and the theology they contain, which in turn helps us sharpen our own song selections for weekend gatherings, which helps us be sure we're not feeding our people poor theology, because people's theology is formed more by the songs we sing than the sermons we preach. Not to mention the culture boost it is when we actually write one ourselves and then get to perform it together. That's just an amazing shot in the arm of adrenaline and energy and for the team. All right, so I would like to wrap up here with one final image and a couple closing thoughts. First, take this in for a second. The farmer knows that the amount of milk he gets from his cow is directly related to the time that cow spends grazing in the pasture. This cow might not look productive right now, but there's a lot going on when you know what to look for. Maybe today for work, the film team just needs to watch 4 movies. Cool. Do it, guys. We all trust that you're going to deliver something amazing to the surface when you need to. And so, how do we manage artists? Well, we trust them. And we love them. We provide a safe place for them. We ask them if there's anything they need, and then we try to provide it if at all possible. And for worship leaders, hey, you can always circle back to these weekly evaluative questions from earlier if you're really struggling. Did you show up? Were volunteers there? Did everyone know what was going on? Are you all still friends? Did your tech director hate you? How did you feel about it? Was it good? But most importantly, was Jesus at the center of everything? And with that, I bid you adieu.